Yeah.
Are we good?
Yep.
Are we? All right. Okay, so let us begin first with your questions and or comments and conundrums of such and dilemmas, if any, and so on and so forth.
I just want to make a comment about the DNC when Mrs. O spoke. You know how, eloquent speaker. I mean, she can.
Yes, she is.
She's a wonderful speaker, Mrs. Obama. And so she was talking, but I was listening to what she was saying.
We're not supposed to do that.
What gets me is the whole thing was everybody's a victim.
Uh-huh.
The woman has 4 mansions totaling $70 million.
And they didn't have any money before they got into politics.
And she's up there talking about, I was like Steve Martin, when that movie, I was born a poor black child.
Right.
It's like, and these people just eat it up.
Yeah, of course they do.
And Mr. O speaks out of both sides of his face and through the top of his head.
Well, it serves society's current purpose. All of those who are not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males are victims
Of us.
of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. And it also serves the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males in feeding their guilt. And so you feed their guilt and make them feel bad, and they want to give away anything and everything to help the victims. And the victims get to feel sorry for themselves, they get to blame other people for their problems, and so it's perfect. Everybody's happy, or everybody's miserable, depends on how you look at it.
Well, everybody's happy but us.
Well, everybody's happy, but those who understand the facts of history, who understand history, and understand that there's such a thing as personal responsibility, and to understand there's such a thing as God, okay, and God makes poor people just as He makes rich people.
He even says it.
And yeah, and those people who know those things, among other things, obviously aren't happy either with the situation. But at least some of them don't let it bother them too much. And when they hear eloquent speakers identify this kind of nonsense, they ignore it.
Well, the only thing with Mr. O is that he's about to lie or say something that he really doesn't believe in, because he hesitates.
Well,
he has a little hesitation, and every now and then he may say, UN. And we all know when you speak publicly, you do not use that word.
yeah.
Because you should know what you're going to say, and you need to believe in what you're saying,
Yeah.
especially if you're an
Well, he likes to fly by the seat of his pants.
Yeah, he does.
He gives speeches like I preach.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, but you're not flying by the seat of your pants. God always has you.
Well, that's true. That's true. I always ask the Holy Spirit to step in and do the work, but no. The thing is with Henry Lighthorse Lee, great guy. Anybody know anything about Henry Lighthorse Lee? Henry Lighthorse Lee was a signator on the Declaration of Independence. He was also the father of Robert E. Lee. He was a very brave, very heroic general in the Revolutionary War, and a bunch of other things. He made the motion to become independent from England and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, Henry Lighthorse Lee was always prompted to get into politics, and he never did. He was appointed to some things, but he never really got into politics and he had a great saying. He said, all politicians, by nature, whenever they open their mouths, lie and deceive. And he said, They are a necessary evil. He didn't say that, but that's what he meant. They are a necessary evil. Got to have them, I guess. But I'm never going to be one. I'm not getting into that. And I think that's true. I don't care if you're electing a dog catcher or you're electing the President of the United States. I don't care which side you're on. I don't care if you're liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Communist. I don't care what it is. It doesn't matter. They lie. I don't know why people get so upset then when they find this out. I don't understand. They should know this. This has been said not just by Lee, but by countless other philosophers and countless other observers and columnists and everything else for 250 years. Even more than that, if you go back to the parliamentary elections in Britain. The people in Britain knew it. Various prime ministers and others said it. Various observers in England said it. Voltaire said it in France of their politicians. It's a fact of life. You could say they can't help it. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but it is a fact of life. Either they lie inadvertently, just to exaggerate themselves or something, or the problem, or they lie on purpose to ingratiate themselves with people, or they tell people lies in order to try to convince them to support their platform or whatever. But they do. They lie. It's not that we don't lie too. We all lie, little ways and big ways in our lives. We're all sinners. We know that. And I'm not saying anything that they're different in that way, except theirs is very public. So, the fact that Donald Trump exaggerates and hyperboles now and then and falsifies things outright, perhaps sometimes, and that Biden did and Kamala does, and Tim from Minnesota, okay, and Vance. Okay, my comment to that is, yeah, well, that's a given. So let's move on and talk about the results. In most cases, they don't come to anything, these lies. Sometimes they do, and when they do, there are consequences. And that's what we should consequence. That's what people need to concentrate on. Are these things consequential? Are these lies consequential? Do they actually have results that are bad results? Do they cause things bad to happen? Okay. Whether Wentz or Welch or Wells or whatever his name is, whether he retired as a master sergeant or sergeant major, who cares? Really. I mean, listen to any World War II veteran or Vietnam veteran for that matter, or Korean veteran. I'm sure that there are things in their stories, my dad's stories, that, when I talked to my brother, we were just doing this the other day. We were just talking about a battle in the Philippines that my dad was in. And his description of the battle to me was different than his description of the battle to my brother. There were things in his description to me that were not in my brother's description, and vice versa. And some ingratiated him, made him look better, and others did not, and so on and so forth. He probably didn't do that on purpose. He probably wasn't trying to build himself up in our eyes or whatever, but it's a fact, okay? Does that make any difference in our, as him being our father or being a good father or our love for him or anything else? No, there's no results. There are no negative results to that, okay? There's no negative results to Trump saying, my helicopter had to land, emergency land. Whether or not that's true or not, there are no negative consequences, and therefore, if it is a misinformation, it's inconsequential. It doesn't matter. Okay? On the other hand, if a politician purposely says, I'm going to do this, and knows for a fact that he or she cannot, okay? That would be impossible for them to accomplish that. either because the legislatures, the Congress and Senate would be in other parties' hands, or because they know that there is not enough support for that particular idea. Okay? That has consequences. That has consequences because business people hear that, they will make their decisions on what products to offer you and what to price those products at, depending on that statement. So that kind of lie has consequences. That kind of lie has results and should be followed up on and should be pointed out and so on and so forth. But what people have done in their past, usually, there are probably exceptions, but usually what people have done in their past, whether they've committed adultery, whether they have gone bankrupt, whether they have achieved a particular military medal or whatever, usually those kinds of things have no negative consequences going forward, usually. There might be some exceptions. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but there might be. So those should be ignored. You can mention them and say, well, this guy is a prevaricator by nature. Well, again, so are we all. What kind of character do you have to have? Think about this for a minute. And I'm not trying to denigrate every single person who runs for an office. But what kind of person do you have to be in order for you to really, really want to be in power? Have some kind of power. City, county, state, federal. What kind of person do you have? You have to be a person who probably thinks pretty well of themselves. Okay? I can do this job. Okay? And you have to be a person who wants to have control over other people. That can be good or bad. But right away, that's something to watch. That's something to be cautious about. Anybody who wants the job, anybody who wants to be president of the United States, anybody who even wants to run for president of the United States should have his head examined, or her head examined, as the case may be. Right away. Right away, I am suspicious of anybody who wants to be governor or senator or congressman. Right away. But that's out of the box. You need to be suspicious of anybody who wants that kind of power. Right out of the box. First thing. So that's a negative on the negative column. That's a 1 on the negative column. That's 1 strike on the negative column. Right away. Before you even start looking at their positions or policies or background or history or anything else. They're already starting in the hole. But very few people do that. Very few people look more at their past, and that's why we have dirty politics, and that's why we have mudslinging, that's why we have insulting, that's why we have name-calling, that's why we have all of that, because that's the way the populace works. I heard a commentator yesterday say, one side or the other is hoping that the American people are not as dumb as the side thinks they are.
I think they are.
And I wanted to comment, I wanted to call into the show, and I wanted to say, no, they're not. They're dumber.
There you go. Right.
They're more ignorant than you think they are. They're more emotionally driven than you think they are. And this goes, in a minute, this goes to another comment that I want to get into a little bit this morning before we go to the next chapter of Exodus. So anyway, okay, enough of that. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll go to the question of the day. Yeah.
Just a quick comment.
Yeah.
I was watching a program that has Steve Colbert on it talking to CNN. Did anybody see the clip?
Don't think so.
When he was talking to CNN, and he goes, well, everybody knows that CNN is very unbiased and everything. But the whole crowd laughed.
Yeah, right.
Steve
Yeah.
Colbert, well, the CNN news anchor goes, was that supposed to be a joke line? He goes, well, it wasn't supposed to be, but I guess it is.
I guess it is. Yeah.
The audience totally surprised
Yeah,
both
yeah,
them
yeah.
and the guest
Yeah.
when they broke out laughing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So there is-
I think that would happen with any network. Yeah.
Yeah.
The question I got is gnashing of teeth in hell, only metaphor. This comes up a lot. Of course, the Jehovah's Witness. One of their slams against historic Christianity is the whole business of hell. And they say that the Christian or the Christian's base Bible description of hell is impossible. Do you know why? Anybody? Do you know why? If you get at the door with the Jehovah's Witness sometime, this might come up if you care to yak at them. The Christian religion's description of hell is impossible because, Jehovah's Witnesses say, that fire, there can be no such thing as perpetual fire. Why? Because fire needs three things, doesn't it? It needs air, it needs fuel, and it needs heat. Okay? Well, okay, air, I guess, you might say, could be forever. And heat, I suppose, you can be forever. But their point is that fuel would not last for eternity. That fuel eventually, the fuel for the fire would eventually be consumed, would be all gone. Therefore, the fire would indeed go out. So that when Jesus talks about the fire that doesn't go out, he's talking metaphorically. Okay? That's Jehovah's Witness idea. So they base that, and then from that, well, there is no hell at all. They teach that the people who are good, or, well, Jehovah's Witness anyway, will be resurrected and will live in a new world and have a job in that new world, and they will live either in heaven, kind of a ethereal abode, or they will live on the regenerated earth, and only 144,000 will be in heaven, but the rest of them will live for eternity on earth, and everybody will have a job. Okay? And depending on how many converts you bring in, how many doors you knock on, how many steps you take in your witnessing, that will depend on where you land in that job. The 144 are already taken. Well, this is a little bit of controversy among them, but let's just say they're already taken. There are 5 million Jehovah's Witnesses around the world, so they're already gone. Those positions have already been filled. But whether you are a big leader of some kind, this is also why you are not supposed to participate in government or military or anything like that, anything with ranks, anything with authority on earth now, because you're waiting for your better job later. So if you wind up being a dog catcher or less, garbage collector, whatever, refuse collector, recycler, whatever, then you obviously didn't knock on enough doors. And on the other hand, if you are ordering the refuse people around, then obviously you did knock on enough doors. Okay. Anyway, so this whole idea of metaphors in hell, metaphors of hell. Okay. What are the descriptions that the Bible gives of hell? Well, it talks about fire. It talks about sulfur, brimstone and sulfur and brimstone. It talks about gnashing of teeth. It talks about sadness, tears, regret. It talks about distance or a separation, if you will, from God. It talks about darkness, complete, utter darkness. This is another problem with fire. Fire gives off light. How can hell be 100% completely dark and there be fire? Well, you might know in science there are some fires that you cannot see. Okay? So fire can exist without being visible. Okay. Anyway, so how many of those things are metaphors? Some Christian scholars, some commentators in the Bible, believe that because there are so many of these, and that some are seemingly contradictive, that you cannot say they are actual, that they are real, that they will actually exist. They will say that all of these things are metaphors for a state of mind, the burning conscience. Okay? or burning regret, the heat of guilt, and so on and so forth. That is certainly true. I would not deny that. The emotional, mental, spiritual side of hell certainly will be all those things. At the same time, nowhere does Jesus, especially in his descriptions, put these things like fire and gnashing of teeth and tears in metaphorical context. In other words, he never says it will be like. Okay? Similes and metaphors, you look for that. When Jesus said the kingdom of God will be like a great fish net that takes in many fish. Well, we know that that means we're not going to be looking to be caught up in a net to go to heaven. Because that, when he says like, that's a metaphor. Okay? When he says the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, and then it blossoms into this big tree and everybody lives in the tree, we won't be living in tree houses in heaven. Because that's what he says like. Okay? He does that countless times in his gospel, in the New Testament. Okay? Kingdom of God is like this, the kingdom of God is like that. He never says that. He never uses that language when he's talking about hell. He never says hell is like a place with fire and brimstone. Or like a place with endless eternal fire. Or like a place of eternal separation from God. He says that it is or are those things. So while I agree that the mental, spiritual, emotional aspect of hell is certainly prevalent in the comments, I also have to say that it is a real physical place, because people have physical bodies, and there will be real physical fire, and real physical brimstone, and real physical sulfur, and real physical heat, and etc., etc., etc. Okay? As I mentioned in my most recent radio ad, anybody heard that one, by the way? Me commenting on hell? I think it got rejected by the owner. I think I told the station manager, when I recorded it, I said, I don't know if this one's going to pass muster with the owner. He says, well, we'll see. Well, it's been 2 weeks. I haven't heard it yet. So, but I said in there, you know, and today in the comics, at least in the Star, there was another joke, another cartoon of hell. I would say I see cartoons of hell once a week somewhere. At least once a week, cartoons. You know, I forget what this one was. It was really stupid. But there's cartoons, jokes. Comedians love to use hell as a basis for their jokes. You know, a nun, a rabbi, and a mechanic, you know, wake up in hell. You know, that kind of thing. And I just talked to another person about this recently. People believe in heaven, and people believe in God. People who don't go to church, people who don't have any connection with any church, religion, whatever, they still believe in God. 90% of them. Polls show this over and over and over again, even though church attendance is the lowest it's ever been. People believe in God, and people believe, the vast majority, 75, 80%, I think, believe that they will go to someplace better after this life. When they die, they will go to someplace better. They will go to heaven, paradise, nirvana, whatever. Okay? But almost no one anymore believes in hell. Okay, you might not go to heaven, but maybe you'll just be reincarnated back on the earth at some future time or past time, or you'll just disappear into space and just cease to exist. Almost nobody believes in hell, which I think is why they don't go to church, they don't practice a religion of any kind, Everybody has a religion. Religion is, yep, there's a God up there. I have no idea who he is. I don't really care who he is. Hey, he's fickle. He does what he pleases. I don't have any control over it, and so on and so forth. And when I die, if I've been more good than bad, then I'll be okay in some way. Whether I get paradise or whatever, but I'll be good. I'll be okay. I'm covered. If I just do more good than bad, I'm okay. That's religion. For the vast majority of, at least people in America and probably in the West, that's religion, okay? But hell does exist. These are not metaphors. These are descriptions from the person we call the Messiah, the person we call the Son of God, therefore perfect and truthful. This is what he says is the case. This is hell. Now, of course, if there are only souls in hell instead of bodies, what difference does it make if there's fire or darkness or anything else? Well, I suppose you could say it doesn't, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And though we cannot extrapolate from the fact that there are bodies in heaven today, Jesus' body, Enoch's body, Elijah's body, maybe Moses' body, so at least 4 bodies in heaven, physical bodies, breathing, heart beating, continuing to exist. So there must be some physical place where they are. We cannot extrapolate for that perfectly that there are those that God may have taken bodily to hell. But it is certainly possible. It's certainly possible. Some commentators believe, for example, that those who rebelled against Moses and God, who were swallowed by the earth, are in hell, both body and soul. Can't prove that, but I would say it's a possibility. If somebody wants to believe that, I wouldn't call them a heretic. Okay? So anyway, answer to the question is, it's not only a metaphor. Matter of fact, I don't think it's a metaphor at all. I think it's a description of the physical realities of hell. Okay, real quick, anybody know what a tetramorph is?
Can I just say one thing on that?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's a metaphor or not. It's not going to be fun.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and the only good thing is in heaven, you're going to have a job, Laura. You're going to have a job in heaven.
It's gonna be watching over you.
Oh, come on, that'll be fun. We'll go out to lunch.
Olive Garden, yeah. Anybody know what the tetramorph is? Or a tetramorph, I guess you could say. Tetramorph. No, don't Google it. Come on.
Just for my own edification.
Okay, tetramorph is a representation in a picture, statue, drawing, whatever, of the 4 gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So an angel of 4 faces, like in Ezekiel, okay, or the 4 angels in Revelation, okay, or also these animals. Okay, Matthew, man, or human, I'll be nice. Mark, lion. Luke, ox. John, eagle. So if you come across in the Bible a description of a being or a place, mountain, chariot, whatever, angel, like I say, that has these faces or these depictions on it, okay? Man, lion, ox, eagle. You know this is a representation of the 4 Gospels. Quickly, in case you want to know, why Matthew is a man, represented by a man, a human. Because he starts his gospel with the human lineage of Jesus Christ. All the begats, that's how he starts his gospel. And he emphasizes Jesus' humanity and Son of Man who fulfilled Old Testament prophecy. Son of Man was big in the Old Testament, that phrase, and Jesus used it a lot in Matthew. Matthew used it a lot. Okay? So Matthew represents man because of those reasons. Mark, lion. Mark's gospel begins with the roaring of John the Baptist out in the wilderness. And Mark's gospel is very dynamic. It's short. It's adventurous, busy. Boom, boom, boom. Jesus. There's not a lot of long soliloquies, long speeches, long sermons, anything like that. Some parables, miracles, but it moves right along. Boom, 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 boom. That's why when anybody asks me what's the first book of the Bible I should read, Book of Mark. It's not the shortest, but it's the shortest gospel by far, and it's the most exciting. It's the one where it doesn't get bogged down. Okay, so lion. Okay, John the Baptist roaring, exciting, adventurous, bold, whatever. Luke, ox. Luke begins with the sacrificial life of Zechariah, John's father, who's a priest who sacrifices things like oxen at the temple, okay, and has a lot to do. The book of Luke has a lot to do with the sacrificial aspect of Christ's life. It's not as chronological as Matthew and Mark. It seems to focus more on the suffering and passion of Jesus. So the whole idea of sacrifice. Okay, so ox for Luke. John's gospel begins with soaring rhetoric. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And nothing was created from the beginning that was not from the Word. And wow, okay. So it soars. Okay, and it's the highest of the theological philosophy in philosophy and theology of the four Gospels. It's more ethereal, more heaven-based, you would say, more philosophical in a way. John, you would call it the thinking man's gospel. Okay, so that's why it's represented by an eagle.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Now, real quick, it'll be 2 or 3 seconds here. Can you handle the truth? What I meant by that. I've mentioned this in sermons, and I may talk about it again today. I don't know. But for those of you that do not know, the Butterfields will not be back. And the reason they will not be back is because Mark and Lolly, love us though they do, as they say, cannot, how do you want to say, swallow or accept all of confessional Lutheranism. That is, it's in the Lutheran confessions. This is very common, as you may or may not know. As I've said, believers are a minority among the membership roll Christians. So there are 2.5, 3 billion Christians in the world, give or take. How many of those are believers? I would say, if we're lucky, maybe half. You can discount all of the so-called Christians in any of the Unitarian type churches. You can discount half at least of those who are in the big Protestant denominations, Methodist, Presbyterians, Church of Christ, all those, because those seminaries no longer teach the Trinity. They no longer teach the physicality of Jesus. They no longer teach the virgin birth, the resurrection, or anything else. Therefore, they are not Christian. So you can discount half of those people. You can say the same thing for the vast majority of Lutherans in the Scandinavian states. Finland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and probably Germany. You can say the same thing for many of the Romans in places like France and Spain, and maybe even South America nowadays. They're not practicing. The ones in Mexico, for example, and Brazil and in the Caribbean, they really conflate their old ancient pagan gods with the one true God, and therefore they're really not believers. So as I say, out of the 2.5, 3 billion Christians in the world, you can right away just say, well, half of them are probably not believers. Of the ones that are left, most of them either are Roman or Baptist or a Baptist type, okay, which deny various doctrines of the scriptures. So take 80% from that half that we had. So let's say we start with 3 billion. We're down to 1.5 billion. Take half again. Okay. You take out the Eastern Orthodox, the Romans, and the Baptists, you're down to probably 500 million, maybe less. Take out half of them again for the those left in those large denominations who are still believers, but again, not practicing, and would not accept things like infant baptism, real presence in the Lord's Supper, and so on. So take half. So we're down to about 200 million. Okay. That's a pretty small remnant. Out of that remnant, let's say it's let's say there's 10 million Lutherans. How many of them are confessional? Maybe 1/4. Okay. Maybe 2 million total in the whole world, confessional Lutherans. Okay. But have different disagreements with even some of the things in the confessions. So you're down to about 500,000. That's about what we're down to. And then split those up among the Missouri Synod, Wisconsin Synod, various confessional churches in Africa, Mexico, China, Japan. Okay. So let's say in the Missouri Synod, for example, you have 1.5 million members. Figure 500,000 of those are real believers, real committed to not only scriptures, but Lutheran confessions. In Wisconsin Synod, we have less than 300,000 souls total, less than 250,000 communicants. No, less than that. Less than 200,000 communicants. An awful lot of them, quite a few of our pastors, for example, are not confessional, 100%. Okay? So their congregations probably are not either. What's my point? My point is we should not be surprised at something like this. I know that it was good to have a family of 6, especially with little kids. I know that it's a big loss for us, more percentage-wise loss than any one we've had in the last few years. But again, give Mark a lot of credit and Lolly a lot of credit for saying we just can't swallow the 100% truth. Now, to be fair, to be honest, they don't think it's 100% truth. Otherwise, they would be able to swallow it because they claim, we follow only the Bible. Well, obviously not. And if he thinks I'm a person of honesty and integrity, as he said, why would a person of honesty and integrity stay in a religion, stay in a church, and pastor a church if I thought that the doctrine I preached and followed was not biblical?
Did he give specifics?
No. I don't expect him to.
Well, no, I mean, because that would help us understand too.
Well, I did ask him to provide specifics in some future date, but I don't expect that. So, I just want you to understand. I just want you to understand that this is par for the course. This is normal. And it just took them a year to come to this decision. Some people only takes two Sundays. You know, they're here for a couple Sundays. That's it. Can't handle this. No, not gonna. You know, others takes a long time. Takes months. I just, you know, who can handle the truth? Very, very small. I was talking to, just take a more minutes on this, 5 more minutes. I was talking to a very good friend of mine, a daughter of one of our best members who passed away a number of years ago. And she was out here, we were out here talking in the parking lot. And she's having some health issues, and I'm hopefully, you know, trying to help her kind of through them. But I don't believe in organized religion. And I told her, I said, well, we're not very organized. I just tell them what to do and they do it. You know, I don't know if that's all that organized, but anyway. So she was standing there talking, and she was talking about how bad things are, and she kind of reads the Bible on her own and interprets it on her own, and she listens to a lot of people on the internet and so on and so forth. And so one of the comments she made was, she says, well, when I get raptured, I hope my husband is with me. I don't want him to be left behind. Well, I've been all through this with you guys, and so you know that's bunk, okay? And I didn't want to get into it out in the middle of the parking lot under the hot sun. But there's a case where a person like that would have a very hard time joining a church like this, because she has believed that, as far as I know, for all the time I've known her, and I've known her for 20 years. And she was telling me about her friend who just got into the Bible, and how they meet and study together. And they're both all convinced of the dispensationalism that supposedly is in the Bible, with the rapture and the millennium and the Jews and Israel and all that stuff, okay? And of course, as I mentioned to you numerous times, this is 95% of Protestant America. Again, churched or not. Unchurched, church, doesn't matter. 95% of your non-Roman believers or Christians in the United States believe in dispensationalism. They follow Darby and Schofield. That's who they follow, and their preachers do, and their denominations do, and that's what they believe, and you cannot blast it out of their heads. So right away, just on that one topic of the end times, right away, we're at a huge disadvantage. Right away. Now, that's not Mark and Lolly's problem. Has more to do with the church and the pastor's office and stuff like that. But again, I don't think they've got it down specific yet. But just please understand that, you know. So when I'm in the pulpit up there and I'm telling you to share the gospel and other stuff, please understand, I know that you will do that, and I know you are doing that. But I also know that it won't probably show a lot of fruit. That if you share the gospel with somebody, if you share the gospel with 5 people, let's say in 6 months, if you share the gospel with 5 people in 6 months, I would expect 4 of those people to ignore it, and 1 of them to maybe look for that gospel in a church someplace. And when you've done that for 2 or 3 years, out of those 5 or 6 people that seek out a church even, I would expect maybe 1 of those people to wind up here. And even then, I wouldn't expect that person, 50-50 chance that person, after listening to 4 or 5 sermons, being here for 4 or 5 worship services, 50-50 chance that person would hang around. And then, considering Sierra Vista and its municipal problems as a city, 50-50 chance that they would move. As a lot of our good members have done. I don't know if you knew the Dinuses at all. They were not here all that often, but they were here for a while. They've gone back into RVing, 100%. They're not going to have a permanent home anywhere. So they love being on the road. And this is after I made very clear to them in a home visit that I really needed them. I really needed them. I needed Dennis to be a council member. I needed Rhonda to get involved with the Ladies' Aid, Ladies' Guild. I needed that. I needed them to get involved. And I encouraged them to get involved in the city and to get involved in the local community. But they loved being on the road. They loved trucking around, seeing the country, go wherever they want, do whatever they want, So they couldn't handle practicing the truth. They're not going to church anywhere. I've sent their membership back to Apache Junction where they used to belong, but they weren't there that often either. What are they going to do when they die? What do they do when they get close to death? Their kids will probably find, their kids don't go to church. They'll probably find a pastor that, will take care of them. But people don't sink down roots anymore. They don't bloom where they're planted anymore. They don't stay and help a church and support the church and build up the church. Okay? Something goes haywire in their lives, or the city doesn't have the restaurants they like, or the shopping they like. People have actually moved from here for restaurants and shopping. They really have. Not just jobs. But just because they don't like the restaurants, they don't like the shopping. So they go someplace else and join a church of 400, 500, 600, 700 where they can hide and not have to participate in anything. And the pastor never comes to visit them and never talks to them and never encourages them to join anything or be involved because they're just a face in the crowd. So, understand what we're up against, and be very appreciative of the small band of active people that we have.
Yeah, thank you, God.
There you go. All right, chapter 28. Chapter 28. Let's start with the notes and talk a little bit about that before we get into the meat. In this chapter, the Lord turns from the tabernacle to the priest. So we're going from the buildings and stuff to the people who occupy the buildings and carry out the functions of the building. The link between this chapter and the preceding one is the lampstand. The following chapters will then describe the high priest's ordination and his tasks. This chapter deals with his garments. So we're going to have, God's not going to leave any detail unturned or any aspect unturned. There will be some details we won't get entirely, but aspects. So clothing and then installation, ordination, whatever, and then the actual duties, the actual tasks. So God's going to cover it all. He's going to be very specific in a lot of things. A few details, as I say, will not be entirely fleshed out, but be very specific in a lot of ways. And again, you see the lampstand, the last thing commented was in the previous chapter was how the priest fills the lampstand with oil. Remember? We talked about that. We didn't know where the oil was coming from. We still really don't know. We don't know what. But anyway, so the last thing he's talking about, God tells you, here's the lampstand, here's what goes in it, here's who fills it. Now, having brought up the guy who fills it, let's talk about him. And let's talk about his clothes, how he's dressed, first of all. See, that's how God proceeds. Number 2, Aaron should be the best dressed man in the world. God clothed him with his glory, God's glory. David speaks about the splendor of God's holiness. Here again, I'm not sure the church appreciates that as a whole, Christian church, anymore. I think, again, if you look at churches from the Middle Ages or even 1800s, I think you would see representations of God's splendor. The high arches, stained glass windows, beautiful architecture. You could tell in those days, really up until the 60s and 70s, You could tell, when you saw a building, you'd say, well, that's a church. You knew it right away. Churches built in the 70s, 80s, and after, in a lot of cases, many, many cases, you look at them and you're not sure what it is. You're not sure it's an office building or if it's an auditorium or what it is, or gymnasium or what. Hey, it doesn't look like a church. It could be anything. But before, you saw this. And you saw this in the way pastors dressed. Pastors either wore clericals, okay, or they wore something nice. I consider this nice. This is, as you know, wedding shirt for Filipino weddings, Mexican weddings too sometimes. So I consider it fancy. I consider it formal. It's formal attire in many places of the world. But in any case, suit and tie was common. Collars, of course, common, and so on and so forth. Okay. Very popular nowadays, of course, is a guy comes out with short pants, sandals, and kind of a golf shirt. That's real common. Again, not reflecting God's glory. But here, notice what God does. And we'll see this as we go along. He's clothing the high priest as God would be clothed, really, if he were to function on earth. Okay?
Isn't that why in the old days women used to wear hats?
Yeah, the same principle. Yeah. Yes, the principle started with the high priest and went from there. But in the New Testament church, especially in certain periods of the New Testament church, people, they had their Sunday go to meeting clothes, which was different clothes from your Monday through Friday clothes, and certainly your Saturday clothes. It was different, and so yes, a lot of those things came out of that idea. Number 3, we can see the significance of the lampstand being the link between these chapters and the previous one. The light of the lampstand represented both the character of God and the testimony of this to the nation and world by man. In this case, the high priest lets his light shine upon man to make him become light. You are the light of the world. So the idea, again, is not just to represent God's glory, but to reflect God's glory. Okay, so that people looking at the high priest would think about God's glory, would have that glory reflect upon them, and try to represent that glory in their own lives. Okay, so again, that's the idea going on here. Number 4, this is what the priesthood is all about. This priesthood is initiated by God. Please note that. That's really important. Moses doesn't come up with the idea of having a priest or a high priest. Aaron doesn't come up with the idea. Nobody comes up with the idea. God is the one. And though there were priests before, we'll talk about that in a minute, though there were people who were called priests before, we don't know what their functions were. We don't know what they did. Here, God later will give us very specific things that the priest is to do. So it's initiated by God. We know little about the priests and their calling before this time. Before Aaron's ordination, only 2 other priests are mentioned in the whole Old Testament. Think about that. Before you get to the book of Exodus and the later ordination of Aaron and his sons, you've got only 2 priests to go by. Okay? Melchizedek and Jethro. About Melchizedek we read, he was a priest of the God Most High. Nothing is said, however, about how he served in this position. Interestingly, he was also referred to as king of Salem, future Jerusalem. He was also bestowed a blessing upon Abram, and he publicly proclaimed the glory of the Lord God. Thus, he was also a prophet. So priests give blessings. Prophets also speak blessings. And he was called a king. So Melchizedek is often referred to as a forerunner of Christ because he was prophet, priest, and king. Just as Jesus is prophet, priest, and king. But that's all we know. It doesn't describe what he did as a priest. What does a priest mean before we get to Aaron? We have no idea. Did they slaughter and sacrifice animals? Did they do intercessory prayer? Were they oracles of God? Did God speak through them to the people? We'd have no idea. Okay? None. There's no description in the Bible at all about what priests were before we get here to this part of Exodus. Regarding Jethro's priesthood, we don't read anything except that he was a priest. That's it. No other details are given. His priesthood was most certainly in the service of Yahweh and not to any heathen idol, for when he brings his daughter and 2 grandsons back to Moses, he clearly recognizes the supremacy of Yahweh. So back in chapter 18, we saw that when he brings Moses' family back to Moses, he gives credit for their safety and gives glory to the one true God. So he was a priest of the one true God. Now, we do know that there were a lot of priests in the false religions around Israel. Of course, Egypt had tons of priests. They had a whole cadre, a whole section of the society that was priests. You could say the same for Babylon. You could say the same for Assyria. You could say the same for all the other empires and all the other cultures of the Mediterranean. All the false religions, all the false gods had priests. And priests in general, the in general kind of idea was a go-between. So priests did things like sacrifices, and they did things like intercessory prayers. They also were oracles. Okay, they read entrails, various animal entrails, to predict the future. Or they spilled blood to predict the future. Later on, of course, they got into cards and dice and all kinds of other little things like that. But in general, from the beginning of time, at least after the flood, probably not before the flood, but at least after the flood, people were getting into religion and making up all kinds of false gods, idols. Most of these religions had priests. Buddhism has priests, Shintoism has priests, Confucianism has priests, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all have priests. And so again, mediator has been the general idea. And even in the Roman Church today, that's the idea. The priest mediates. You go to the priest, you confess, then the priest passes along God's forgiveness to you. The priest offers the unbloody sacrifice of the Mass on your behalf. You bring the Christ, in a sense, to the Mass. Then Christ is sacrificed or crucified again in a mystical, unbloodied way, and then that is again offered to God. That's why the Mass in the Roman Church is not something God does for you, it's something you do for God, which is a total reversal of the Lord's Supper as given in the Bible. But that's the idea. That's why they are called priests, because that's what they do. From you to God and from God back to you. They're intermediaries, aside from the saints and Mary and everybody else. I had to get a kick out of one guy. He's very common or very well-known commentator on the internet. He is a convert to Romanism later in life, and he's a very big proponent of Romanism. He had a podcast the other day, and his question was, or what he was talking about was, why do Protestants hate the Virgin Mary? Why do Protestants hate the Virgin Mary? And I listened to a little bit of it, and he was just all off the beam. He didn't know what he was talking about. He's not a Protestant, never was, and so he got it all wrong. It's not that we hate the Virgin. We don't hate the Virgin Mary. Certainly, Luther did not hate the Virgin Mary. Thank goodness. But the idea is that she is not a mediator. Christ is a mediator. That's the idea. It has nothing to do with hate. It has nothing to do with dislike. It's the fact she's not a mediator, and the Roman Church, of course, teaches she is a mediator. That's the difference. Number 5, the priesthood to which God called Aaron is particularly connected to the service in the tabernacle, obviously. Okay, there were no synagogues yet. There was no other place. There were no churches. There was only one place you could go to meet God in a physical sense. There's only one church in the whole country, and that was the tabernacle, later on the temple. Aaron and his descendants were to serve in this limited context of space and time. The space is the tabernacle, later the temple. The time is death. You served until you died. And then you were replaced by a son or close relative, one of the Levitical priests. Melchizedek exemplified the eternal priesthood. As such, he is a type of Christ. About him, David prophesied, "You are a Messiah, a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." Jewish commentators equated Melchizedek with the patriarch Shem, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It's interesting, by the way. I was just thinking about this the other day. We always call them Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But that is not their birth order. We always put Shem first because Shem was the line of promise. But the line of promise, seldom in the Genesis, went through the oldest. Didn't go through Cain, right? And it didn't go through Japheth. Japheth was the oldest. Shem was probably the youngest. Yeah. So even though we say Shem, Ham, and Japheth, it was Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Anyway, the Jews always considered Melchizedek to be Shem himself. If true, then he lived to be 600 years old. He was born 100 years before the flood, and he lived 500 years after the flood, according to the Bible. There's no proof they were the same person. But this is, if they were, this is fascinating, because if they were, but even if they weren't, Shem living 500 years after the flood would make Shem a contemporary to whom? Who would be a contemporary, also a contemporary, live at the same time as Shem? Which of the patriarchs?
No?
Abraham, certainly. So Shem could have known, can't say he did, but certainly could have known Abraham. He lived long enough to know Abraham. He lived long enough to know Isaac. Isaac lived long enough to know Joseph's sons. And Joseph's sons, of course, went into Egypt. And some of them lived long enough to have lived at the time, at least at the early years of Moses. So, what does that mean? What does that tell us? That tells us that between Adam, because Shem would have known who? Methuselah. Methuselah would have been his great-grandfather. And Methuselah lived hundreds of years alongside Adam. So think about that. From Adam to Moses, you could have as few as 4 people. Adam to Melchizedek, Melchizedek to Shem, Shem to Isaac, and then Isaac to the written records that Moses used for Genesis. That's astounding. It covers almost 2,000 years. So when Moses records Genesis, God dictating, of course, he could have also had the written records, the narratives left behind by people like Adam, Methuselah, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. Interesting point. Number 6. Of course, the true high priest is our Lord Jesus Christ, who is not subject to limitations of space and time. The writer to the Hebrews says about him, "Now there have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he is a permanent priest." The point of what we are saying is this: we do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of majesty in heaven and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle, set up by the Lord, not by man. So this is why we don't need priests. We don't need priests anymore. There's no reason to have priests. Both the Roman and the Eastern Orthodox churches, various branches, have it wrong. You don't need a mediator on earth anymore. Your mediator is in heaven. You go directly to him, who is also God. So yeah, there's no need for priests. But of course, having a priesthood is very conducive to power and authority. I'm speaking for God when I preach and teach, but if I am God's literal conveyor of righteousness, forgiveness, whatever, that gives me a lot more power. Roman priests have more, shall we say, authority than Protestant ministers in many cases. And they use it. Remember that famous scene in The Quiet Man? You know The Quiet Man? John Wayne, okay? The famous scene, they're in the bar, and Ward Bond comes in, he's the priest. Ward Bond comes in, and Victor McLaughlin and John Wayne are arguing and fighting, and the father comes in, he says, "Take the man's hand, shake hands." And Victor McLaughlin said, "I'd rather join the Church of Ireland," by which he means the Anglican Church. I'd rather join the Church of Ireland. And of course the father said, "As if they'd have you," right? Yeah. And then he says to him, he threatens him, he says, "Take the man's hand or I'll read your name in the Mass on Sunday." Which means there's a part in the Mass where you read out both people who have died and everything and people you're praying for, and also anybody who's been bad. Okay? That's a great deal of authority. Okay? I mean, that'd be great if I could pick up the phone and call the delinquents, right? Call the people not in church, call the delinquents, and I could say, "Hey, how come you've not been coming to church the last 5 weeks or 6 weeks or a month or 2 months or whatever?" "Oh, yeah, we haven't got around to it," or "We don't care." Yeah. I'd say, "Well, you better be here. I'm going to talk about you in my sermon on Sunday." Of course, people today would go, "You do that, we'll sue." But that's the kind of power that Roman priests have, though I doubt they use that anymore or whatever, but that's the kind of power that they have. So priest, you've got a priest, you've got powers. Number 7, although we are looking at a picture that gives a limited and partial view of the heavenly reality, there is certainly enough beauty and glory here to bless our study. So, we're going to go ahead and study the whole business of the priesthood. There's enough in here that we can relate either to Christ or to modern pastors. There are some priestly functions that modern pastors still do, and we as lay people would do well and to study them and learn from them. So we're gonna go ahead, even though, again, Jesus is our priest. Perhaps, and I've done this before when I've studied Exodus, just skip the whole thing on priests and sacrifices and everything because it doesn't apply to us. That's true, it doesn't apply to us in a direct sense, but it does in an indirect sense. God calls Aaron and his 4 sons to the priesthood. 2 of his sons, Nadab and Abihu, would not fulfill their task for long. They died when they got drunk and presented strange fire before the Lord, Leviticus chapter 10. Eleazar, the next one, would later succeed Aaron as high priest upon Aaron's death in Numbers 20. We'll answer the question next time. So we'll start with the question and go from there. And we'll probably read verses 1 and 2. So we might start at 3, but we'll go back and read 1 and 2 anyway. All right. Any other comments, questions? Let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.
Pastor 4?
Thank you.
Pastor, I want to say
Yeah.
about abortion.
Uh-huh.
I was listening to a here. See, now
Oh,
it's
I
green.
see.
Okay, so I don't even click that on. Is this? And look at it's pink. Hello?
Huh. Okay, well, he must have changed that because for a while that one wasn't working.
Well, no, but I have been doing this one only for at least 6, 7 months.
Oh, okay.
So I'm gonna ask him, why do we even
Yeah,
use
yeah,
this?
he would know.
Okay, now let's try this. Because I thought I had one battery out and it was still working. You know what I'm gonna try?
Huh.
Does it?
You got me.
Did you want this last drink that's in here?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Laura.
Hey, Bruce.
Since